Well, good afternoon or good noon, everyone. Good to be with you today. And welcome to our daily dose. We spend about 5 or 10 minutes doing a daily devotional to help us keep connected with the other folks of the Pinellas Park Church of Christ. Of course, everybody is happy to join in. We've been talking about the life of David and kind of applying it to some of the things that are currently going on around us. Yesterday we talked a little bit about Bathsheba and the sin that he committed with Bathsheba, and then, of course, the subsequent murder of her husband, Uriah, and some of the lessons that we can learn from that. And we're going to kind of pick up today where we left off there yesterday, and we want to talk a little bit about the prophet Nathan. Of course, David, he doesn't really come forward right away with the idea that he had sinned against God. Psalm 51, of course, is going to be one of those things that we can look at to kind of see that contrite heart and some of the things that David has to say about that sin after the fact. Some people see it as Solomon, some people see it as David. But there are a lot of good things there. But before or Psalm 32, I'm sorry, not Psalm 51, before David even writes that psalm, before he even confesses that fault, into his life comes a guy by the name of Nathan. Nathan is, we're told, a prophet of God. Nathan is a guy who's probably just like the other prophets. I've been trained in understanding the will of God, the Word of God, and he is sent, of course, to do the missions of God. And on this occasion, he goes to David, who is the king, and David knew Nathan. It is very obvious that he did know Nathan. But Nathan has a very tough job. He's got to go to the king of his own nation and tell him, you've done wrong. You've done something, and not only is it wrong, it's heinously wrong. But the way that Nathan does it is kind of where I want to focus our attention today. Nathan goes to David, and instead of just sort of pulling out the truth, David, you've you've done wrong. You've committed murder. You've committed adultery, and all of these horrible things. You've lied about it. You've deceived people about it, and all of it's just a whole boatload of horribleness. He approaches him in a little different way. You remember, he tells him this story. And I want to read you just a little bit of it about two guys who live in a certain town. One of them's rich and one of them's poor. And he writes in Second Samuel, Samuel writes in Second Samuel chapter 12 about this incident. The rich man had very many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing but one little ewe lamb, which he had bought. And he brought it up, and it grew up with him and with his children. It used to eat up the morsels and drink from his cup and lie in his arms, and it was like a daughter to him. Now there came a traveler to the rich man, and he was unwilling to take one of his own flock or herd and prepare for the guest who had come to him. But he took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for the man who had come to him. And David's anger was greatly kindled against the man, and he said to him, Nathan, as the Lord lives, the man who has done this deserves to die, and he shall restore the lamb fourfold, because he did this thing and because he had no pity. And Nathan said to David, you are the man. Thus says the Lord of God of Israel, I anointed you king over Israel, and I delivered you out of the hand of Saul, and I gave you your master's house and your master's wives into your arms, and gave you the house of Israel and of Judah. And if this were too little, I would add to you as much more. Why have you despised the word of the Lord to do what is evil in his sight? You've struck down Uriah the Hittite, and he goes on and he details some of what David had done. So he tells him this story, and it's interesting to me because I think most of us probably don't, in the face of murder, in the face of adultery, in the face of this great deception, in the face of all of the horrible things that David had done, we would be tempted just to become enraged ourselves and lash out and throw the truth right before David. Sometimes I think that's what we need to do, and it works. But sometimes we need someone more like Nathan, who is going to put these things in terms that we understand. So a couple of things I want to mention. Number one, we always need somebody in our life who is going to hold us accountable. I mean, if our entire life is spent with people around us just simply telling us the things that we want to hear, oh man, you're great, and oh, that was so perfect, and oh, if everybody around us just constantly blows smoke at us, then we never really know the truth, and then one day we find out that things weren't all that good, and that our efforts weren't really that great, and it just kind of destroys our world, and that's a horrible thing to have lived life not having anybody who would hold us accountable and tell us the truth about the way that we were living our lives, or the things that we said, or about the things that we do. So we need, number one, that person who's going to hold us accountable. But number two, I think the approach matters. How we approach these things matters. We're told to examine ourselves. Paul told that to the Corinthian brethren. We're to test all things. Paul wrote that to the Thessalonians. We're to put things to the test. We're to try them ourselves. But, sometimes we're just not real good at figuring out, okay, what do I need to change? What do I need to do that is different? So we need that person to come along and tell us, look, this is what I think you need. This is where I think you need to change. Or very simply, you're not doing, things right. But that needs to be done in such a way that people are encouraged and strengthened, by it. We can have a right thing in mind, but end up doing something that opposes that idea. In other words, your approach is going to matter. You can correct somebody, but in your correction, you end up doing more harm because now they're focused on the way that you did it rather than the heart with which it was done. In other words, if we approach people harshly, they're more likely to react harshly, and they're more likely to, respond in a very negative way, and attach the idea of their being wrong to that negative reaction. In other words, you come at somebody harshly to try to correct them, and now all of a sudden they're going to justify their own action, which was wrong, because you approached them in a harsh way. And they, in their own mind, convince themselves that, well, they were harsh. So, somehow that means that, my infraction is not so bad. And we don't want to, do that. But we find this, throughout the Bible, where we have people who hold each other accountable, and they do so in a manner that is, befitting, Christ. I mean, there was a time when he took the gloves off, for instance, with the Pharisees. And their teaching that was inconsistent with the way they lived their lives. And quite frankly, he doesn't pull any punches with them. He tells them, you're a brood of vipers, you're hypocrites, you're, whitewashed tombs, and because that's what they needed to hear. Sometimes we've got to be that way. But then again, when he runs across the woman at the well who had all these marital issues, she was married once and married again, and then even the person that she was living with wasn't the person who was her husband. Well, he doesn't do the same with her. Instead, he holds her accountable, but he walks her slowly and very gently into it, to the point at which she's not rejecting the message, but she's now embracing him as the prophet sent from God. So number one, we need people in our lives to hold us accountable, but we need people in our lives to hold us accountable in ways from which we can learn. There's an old passage in the Proverbs chapter 22, I believe, that talks about train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. And a lot of times that we tend to think that means that, from an early age, teach the child Bible. And then certainly that's, true. You find that in the example of Timothy and his mother and grandmother and all of that. But I don't think that's what the proverb writer was teaching. What the proverb writer was teaching is literally train up a child according to the tenor or the manner of his way. In other words, speak the words to a child, teach the child in a way that he can learn and gain the most from the information. Then when they're old, they're going to remember that lesson. I mean, if you teach them in a way that they never get it, it doesn't matter if they're old or young, they're not going to get it, right? So, train the child according to the way that they learn. Train them according to, how they will listen and how they will hear, just like Christ did with the woman at the well, just like we can do as we go out into this world. And I know many of us are not going out, a great deal too much these days. And I would encourage you, stay in, even if you don't think you're at risk. Have respect for other people, like we mentioned in a subsequent lesson, and stay in and don't be a part of the spread. But when we do reach out, when we do encourage, one of my neighbors, and I just want to mention this, it doesn't have much to do with the lesson, but one of our neighbors actually set up it's a tent of sorts, but I think it's more of a canopy with just like 4 poles and a cover on it. And they have a big sign that says, "Send your prayer requests," and they have a number that's listed there. And I thought, man, what a wonderful way to reach out and encourage people. And we walked around the corner, and written on the road is "Stay home, stay healthy, better days are on their way." Somebody's child had taken and written that on the road in that sidewalk chalk. And I thought, man, what another wonderful way to reach out to people, holding people accountable, but with a great, positive, message. There is a God. He cares about you. He sent you his word to hold you accountable, but we need to do that for one another. We need to be part of the daily dose of truth that we give to one another, and certainly that we can receive. Sometimes you're going to be the receiver. Sometimes you're going to be the giver. But it's all about that truth and determining what it is. I thank you for showing up today. This has been your Daily Dose.